come to order. If I could have a roll call.
Teresa Golden?
Steve Caswell.
Laurie G.
John Cutler.
Greg Smith.
John Aikman.
And Michael O'Brien will be joining us shortly. He's just been delayed due to travel. So if everyone would join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have two upcoming meeting dates, June 21st and July 5th. And we have several sets of minutes to approve this evening. The first set is from April 5th, so I think everyone except Jason was here, and John Aikman, you would abstain because you
Yes.
also were not here. So do I have a motion to approve the minutes of April 5th?
So moved. Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
And one
Abstain.
abstention. Thank you. And on April 20th, Craig, you were not here for April 20th, so do I have a motion to approve the April 20th minutes?
So moved. Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And any abstentions?
Abstain.
Correct.
And Craig abstain? Okay. May 3rd, let's hold off May 3rd. We don't have a quorum yet, but when Mike gets here, somebody help me remember to come back to that one.
Yep.
And on May 17th, Steve, you were not here, but I think we've got a quorum. Did everybody have a chance to review May 17th, or should we hold that till next time? I don't think I read May 17th
No,
yet.
let's hold it all.
Okay, so we'll carry May 17th over to the next meeting. Okay, great. The first item on our agenda tonight was for a minor site plan amendment for Arthur'sburg Corners. We have a request to defer that to our June 21st meeting, and the applicant and Scott had both discussed that, so we'll carry that over to our June 21 agenda. The next item on our agenda is a referral from the town board, and Michelle, I think you gave us a quick overview of this last time. If you want to just catch us up on where we are for the rezone
Sure.
request for 27 Orchard Place.
Sure. I had prepared a memo and circulated it. I think everybody probably had a chance to take a look at that. Basically, the planning board is in receipt of a referral from the town board to review and provide comments on a rezoning application at 27 Orchard Place. The site is currently zoned R13, but it's in an area of the town where there's a lot of pre-existing non-conforming uses and a lot of uses that aren't zoned the way that they're being used, or sites that are not zoned for the way they're being used. So I think overall, the site does deserve a look by the planning board and the town board in general, just in general about the zoning in the area and what they may want to see in the future. But in order not to hold up this particular applicant, I have a few suggestions to the planning board, and then I'll take your comments, and then we can put them in a memo and provide them back to the town board as quickly as possible. One of the thoughts that I had was we could create potentially, there's not just in this location, but in other locations throughout the town, there's sites where there's zoning, like for instance, there's an industrial parcel and then there's a residential parcel right next door, and there's no transition between those two types of uses. So one of the thoughts we had was perhaps we have created a transition business zone in the code that's currently exists right now, and it's a commercial zone, but it's slightly less intensive use than a regular business district, B1 or B2. It allows more office and slightly reduced impact uses. We were thinking potentially of allowing, or considering allowing, or recommending to the town board to allow, I should say, a transition use where a parcel abuts either an existing business parcel or an industrial parcel. And we could perhaps specify a certain amount of the lot lines that need to abut, like maybe 50% or more, or if it's a rear parcel, or however we want to state it, and then perhaps allow that transition zone in that location for that
So-
parcel.
Michelle, is this something that other local towns are doing, or is there any other town's code that we could look at that might have something like this in place?
I can check on that for you. I don't know off the top of my head.
And then would it also work in the reverse? So if I'm an industrial zone parcel and I'm next to residential, could I ask to be residential?
I suppose it could. I mean, we can write it in however we feel fit to write it, but I think that in this particular case, I think the idea is to buffer the residential from more intense uses, because of course you want to protect residential uses from being near noxious noises and odors and those types of things. So I think it's more important to protect the residential than it is to allow residential in an industrial zone. And right now, I think it's important that we also maintain our industrial zones because we don't have a huge amount of industrially zoned property in town.
Okay. I definitely like the idea of a transition like that, because I think often the best use of a property next to one of these zones is probably to either continue the business use or have some sort of, I think you're using the phrase transitional use. I think that's a good thing. Would this also kind of go hand in hand? I know at different times we've looked at, as developers come in, if they want to build a second floor, having it be like residential on a second floor, or is this really different than that, and it's just for the, I'll call it the edge zoning, edge parcels on a zone?
Well, we could certainly make a recommendation for that. If you have a residential use right next to a commercial property, it does make sense, a certain amount of sense perhaps to think about allowing second-story residential above an office. That also adds to vibrancy of downtown, so that is another thing that we could look at as part of the overall zoning, and if you feel like it's appropriate in this location, we could also add that as a recommendation to the town board.
Okay. Typically, if you were for recommending that, is that anywhere within town limits where there would be a transitional
I think,
zone, or would you limit it to hamlets, or how would that typically?
I mean, at this point, I think I would recommend it to the hamlet designated areas, but again, that's up to you, for whatever you want to recommend to the town board, and ultimately what the town board decides.
Personally, I'm certainly in agreement with not holding up one, a particular request from.
And I'm sorry, I just want to clarify that, because if you recall, the hamlet designations are quite larger than you think they are in the, so we're talking about, when I say a hamlet designation, I say what's actually designated in the code, which is quite large for the little hamlet areas.
Right.
It goes from, I think it's Palin to Mary Lane in Hopewell, so it's areas that you wouldn't necessarily think of as being part of the Hopewell hamlet would be in that designation.
So Michelle, just to quickly recap, we're suggesting that it seems like an appropriate rezone to actually make this parcel.
Yeah, and I can talk about
but
that
still
real brief.
consider-
The parcel that wants to be, that is requesting the rezone is next to an industrial use on one side and actually, it's zoned R1/3, however, it's being used industrially on the other side, and then across the street from a parcel that's also a commercial use. So it's on 3 sides, it's surrounded by either commercial or industrial uses.
Right. No, I think it makes perfect sense.
I would assume none of the neighbors have raised any objections.
Not that I know of.
Well, I think if the town board is taking action, if it was appropriate to have a public hearing, it would be by the town board.
Right.
So our ask here is to give the town board our comments, and then they would act.
Correct, and they'll decide what they want to do as far as the zoning.
So Michelle, you're going to update, I'm just looking here, you're going to update with the suggestion for the transition zoning and to allow this one parcel to move forward, so we're not holding them up as we do something a little bit broader in scope, but.
Correct.
But to be specific, this wouldn't be considered spot zoning because we are looking at it in a broader sense and would
Correct.
apply to a much larger
Correct.
kind of area within town. Okay.
And if you're in agreement with some of the other comments, I can add them as general comments for the area as well.
Yeah, I was fine with what was here, and I definitely like the idea of the transition zone or mixed-use zones, whatever the right phrase is. And is it typically, you're looking at the amount of the lot line that abuts a different zone? Or is it just if any portion of your parcel abuts a different zone?
It can be done either way. It can be done either way, definitely.
Okay.
And in this case, I mean, it's clear that a lot of, and I'm sorry, because I have the memo that I don't know if you guys have it in front of you, but it's clear that a bunch of the parcels, residential parcels are abutting industrial zones in the rear, quite a bit of it.
Right.
The picture that was in there, how old is that? The picture of the house?
I don't know, it's from Dutchess Parcel Access,
Okay.
so it's what's on
It's got to be
online currently.
20, 30, somewhere in there.
Yeah, but
That's the hamlet part,
I
you
could
know.
swear that the road is closer to the house than it's
Oh,
shown
then
in
from
this
here,
picture.
absolutely.
It is.
It is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, this looks like
And
it's,
well, yeah, yeah.
which is a factor in my mind in terms of how much of a residence it is with no, you know.
Yeah. I mean, the houses are very close together in that location,
Anyway, yeah.
and it is very commercial all around it.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the big concern.
But it might be a nice area to try out something like the mixed-use zone or transition zoning or something like that. I like that idea. Okay. If you can, if, Michelle, if you're able to find us any examples in
towns.
area towns, I think in terms of the recommendation of the town board, I'm fine with that as the recommendation. I'd just personally like to kind of get a feel for how those codes read.
Sure.
Any other comments or suggestions for Michelle on the recommendation? Anyone strongly opposed to the recommendation or concerned?
Makes sense.
Do you need anything more from the planning board then, Michelle, to go ahead and finish?
No,
the-
I'll try to wrap this up tomorrow and send the letter around.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the color coding. It would really help to understand the way the different zones are kind of interacting right now. Okay, the next item on our agenda is an adjourned public hearing for Stuart Scott, 6 lots on Warren Farm Road. And do I have a motion to reopen the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Good
You have
evening.
something to put up on the,
Public hearing.
I've got a disc.
Yeah.
okay. Because
I can
with
put it
with the
in for
public
you.
hearings, we like to have them up on the board so that everybody can see them.
Yeah.
Over here, Ernest. Oh, I see it.
Thank you, Michelle. So while Michelle's putting that up on the board, do you want to just quickly summarize where we are for the public?
Well, at the last meeting, there was considerable discussion regarding how to implement the mitigation that's being proposed for this project. And I think the board says we've never, correct me if I'm wrong, that we really have never done this before. We're not really sure how to
That's correct.
to proceed. And so after that meeting, I spoke with Michael Nowicki, who's our wetland biologist, and he's represented other clients in the town. And he said currently, there's 2 projects in the town, Four Seasons and the Hamlet. I think that's that new area just outside Hopewell Junction, where he's doing annual reports. So
Annual reports for what?
for wetland mitigation.
What type of wetland mitigation?
It's,
Because we're not aware of any wetland mitigation on either of the projects referenced here.
well, that's what he told me. Evidently, that must have been part of the approval. I mean, I didn't go and research it, but I just went on his.
So you're, and just to clarify, the letter, and I want to make sure that there wasn't, that the letter was dated June 2nd, but it came in by email to us late yesterday
Right.
after the planning office closed. So we got it this morning.
Okay.
We did our best to look through it, but honestly, I don't think our professionals have had time to actually pull these project plans to go in and see, well, what was the approval, what was the
Right.
impact to wetlands and mitigation, if any. So just in fairness, I want to say we haven't had enough time yet to look at that. But I guess Four Seasons is a project that's been completed for a very long time, so.
Well, what he said, he says for a period of 5 years, he had to go out, and I'm just basing on what he says, that he goes out for a period of 5 years, that he's going out, and it sounds like he still is, but he's doing reports, and he has to prepare these reports and submit them to the Army Corps.
So on Four Seasons.
I guess that's the one on Phillips.
Because we have another
The Army
development called
Corps?
Four Corners in town, so,
To the Army Corps, but not the town?
Army Corps, yes. Well, the permit is between the
shoot through
applicant.
the Army Corps.
It's between the applicant and Army Corps.
Okay, so the town would not receive a copy?
Evidently, they needed a wetland permit. That's that project on, is that Phillips Road? I'm not sure. Off of Beekman?
Well, that would be Four Corners, not Four
What did I say,
Seasons.
Four Seasons?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Four Seasons is over in
It's a different
Wikipedia. Four Corners is up off Phillips Road.
Okay, maybe it must be Four Seasons. I don't know, maybe,
Okay.
did I state that incorrectly? I'm not sure, but.
Well, that's what we're,
Also an acapella
Okay.
group from New
But
Jersey.
the point being is that he is doing part of the condition of the report was to do of the permit, was to do, you had to do annual reports to the
So-
Corps.
And if it is Four Corners, the one off Phillips Road, I don't recall there was any wetland mitigation. What I do recall was that there was some buffer area encroachment, and there was some requirement to ensure that development didn't impact the buffer areas. So I think we do, Michelle, I'm just looking at you because hopefully you can help us research this. But I think I'd like to understand whether there's actual wetland mitigation that happened at this site, because I don't recall that as part of our project. But again, it's been a little while, so it's certainly possible. And then Hopewell Hamlet is,
I believe isn't that the area just outside the Hopewell Junction?
It's Hopewell
so is that
Glen.
Hopewell Glen?
Yeah.
Hopewell Glen is
I'd also like to point out is both of those projects, the developer's still involved, is still building. There's a performance bond, there's escrows with the town, so they're still active projects.
Right. Well, I would think they'd have to be.
So, Tom, are you recalling that there's actual wetland mitigation
Mitigation,
happening
no, I'm
in
not.
either of these projects? Because I don't.
There may be
I
a
mean,
re-
Hopewell Glen's fairly recent.
Right, and there's nothing that I recall, any of the approvals saying that there had to be any ongoing mitigation. But even if there were, that's distinguishable from this development because there's going to be a 6-lot subdivision if it's approved as proposed, and the lots would be sold off. This is, the developer has roads yet to finish, performance bonds, guarantees to the town for fulfilling a lot of obligations. So I think it's really apples and oranges, but.
Well, what Nowicki did say is that in that case, evidently, there's a homeowners association in place, which in our case, that would not be the case.
Right, right.
I mean,
But I
that's the
think
one
also to
difference.
Tom's point, the developer is also there long-term because these are large projects. But what I'd like to do is just ask Michelle to actually pull those for us and just take a look and see, Michelle, what the permit looked like, if there was wetland mitigation. Tom, I take your point that it may be apples and oranges, but I think since Mike is representing that he's doing wetland mitigation in these two projects, I'd just like to make sure
Well,
that...
he didn't do it, the mitigation was done, but then he has to file annual reports. That is the mitigation, is it being maintained, is it in place? I
And
mean,
what was
sometimes
the-
you can create it's my understanding, you can create a wetland that doesn't take. I mean, that's possible. I mean, you can go in and you
I
can...
don't recall
you can-
any creation of wetlands in either of those. And again, I may very well be wrong, but I just don't recall it. So we'll pull the applications, though, and we'll be able to find it in our record.
Would it be out of line to ask for copies of those reports that he's doing for?
Well, I don't know. I have to check with him. I mean, again, it kind of caught me off guard. So what I didn't know. I asked him. I said, have you? He says, I'm working on 2 right now. So I didn't go and research it and ask him for
I
information.
know both of those projects have environmental monitors, and we have
Yeah.
some very strict restrictions about disturbance areas and things like that, but I don't recall any actual wetland mitigation. So again, it's just, I'm not saying there isn't, I just don't recall it, so we just need to go. We didn't have time to go and do that when we received your letter this morning, so we'll do that as soon as we can. We'll look at it. Tom, I realize just staying with the wetland mitigation plan itself, and the fact that these are very large developments with a developer still involved, with a homeowners association, I'm I'm still not clear where we would be able to protect a homeowner that would inherit a plan like this.
I think that's what our concern is.
Okay, so
Not
from a
even
mitigation
just the
standpoint,
homeowner,
from an
but that we
impact
can-
mitigation standpoint, I'm
Don't
not,
forget that even though the Army Corps is indicating, sure, you can go ahead and do this, these are the conditions, you're still the lead agency. You have to take that into consideration in determining the process and what safeguards are going to be in place to fulfill those requirements, so.
okay.
The one time there was discussion about putting up a bond. Is that something the board is still leaning towards?
I think, me personally, and I certainly defer to other members of the board to weigh in, I'm leaning more towards not being comfortable having wetland mitigation here on this site and using a less impactful layout that doesn't require that mitigation to happen. Because I just don't think that it would be fair to a homeowner to place that burden on them. And I don't know that the town, even with bonding, I just don't know that the town would go onto a homeowner's site and try to figure out how to reclaim wetlands if for some reason plantings didn't take or something like that.
I mean,
But
firstly, the wetlands, as far as the actual work, I believe that would have to be done by the current owner. In other words, I would think that would all have to be in place prior to even issuing a building permit. I mean, that's one control. I mean, maybe another control, and I'm just kind of thinking out loud, and we'd have to talk to the owner. Maybe that's something that's done prior to the signing of the plat.
When you say, describe it in your mind, I mean, what does this thing look like? That's what I'm having trouble.
What do you mean look like?
What are the conditions? How does it work? I mean,
You mean the wetland mitigation?
yeah,
It's on the plan. All the details of what gets done on this is all on the plan.
okay, right. But in terms of over time,
Okay, once the work is done, okay, and by the way, the permit that we have, I believe, is valid until April or May of next year, okay? But after the work is done, then for the next 5 years, there would have to be reporting to the Army Corps as to, is the wetland holding up as it was intended? Is it taking on? And those reports would go, that's all part of the permit process. At the end of 5 years, if everything is in order, then there's a notice of, there's closure or notice of termination or something of that nature. That's how that would work.
okay. And you would see the bond being held or conveyed to the homeowner?
Well, that was something that was raised by the town. I mean, evidently the town, the planning board, as being lead agency, evidently is very concerned that this work's going to get done. I think the concern that the board has.
No, I have
No.
zero concern that the work would be done,
Done,
because
right.
you wouldn't get COs and wouldn't be able to transfer title or anything unless the work was done. My
Right.
concern is maintenance over
Okay.
the 5 years after a homeowner takes possession of that
Right.
What
wetland.
happens in year 4 when there's issues with the wetland mitigation and they have to be corrected? Who does the correcting? Who pays for it?
The permit goes with the landowner.
Okay.
So the landowner then is responsible for any
Whether that's the
additional
current,
expense?
whether it's the current owner applicant, or whether it's let's say the other end of the spectrum, if it's someone, if you go in and buy that lot and build a house there, it would be your responsibility.
And they would be able to recoup the bond,
Who's they?
the homeowner. In other words, that bond transferal would be part of the,
See, that's part of the issue though, Mike, is that
Right.
the bond would be in the name of a developer that's selling the lot, walking away.
away.
Now you have a personal homeowner
Exactly,
that's
that's-
stuck with mitigating a wetland that may have died at year 3.5 or 4.
so that's.
That's where we're struggling, because we don't have a
That's where I'm
mechanism to make
struggling,
that
and that's kind of where I'm
happen.
asking. I mean, Ernie, you seem to have put a lot of thought into this. How do you see that playing out?
Well, the suggestion of the bond was actually, I think, by the board, but, I mean, agreed, it's not your typical thing that's done, but I think between either notes, restrictions in the deed, however that is put together, I mean, that's how it would have to be done. I mean, maybe this falls more in a legal arena more than anything else, but I don't know how else we would do that.
I mean, sure, you know, the notes thing, I think falls very close to just good faith, and I don't think that's really appropriate here, right?
Well, typically, our experience has been, I mean, and not, there's always exceptions to the rule, that most of the time when these wetlands are mitigated, and what we're talking about doing is making an existing wetland larger, okay? Typically, they work, but I mean, there's always exceptions to that. There's always, you know, whether it would end in year 4 or whether after the first spring, that summer, if everything would die, I guess that's a possibility. But they've been identified as being wetlands. The Army Corps has taken, they're regulated by Army Corps. And so all that being said, you know, it would have to work along that line. I mean, it's not, let's face it, it's not impossible, but obviously you have to
The
have
whole
a cover
purpose
level.
of the permit is to allow you to eliminate another wetland in another part of the site.
That's right.
To engender another lot.
That's right.
I have a question.
And the area where we're creating the wetlands is kind of the logical place on the site because it's the lowest part of the site. I mean, it's kind of it's the logical place for it to be. You wouldn't want to do it at the upper end of the site. It's the logical place where it should be.
I have a question, Ernie, which I'm not sure you'll be able to answer. You might have to ask Mike Nowicki this. I know that there's a requirement that I think it's less than 5% of the wetland species can be invasives. So I know there's currently Phragmites out there, and I know that you're going to be mitigating, you're going to be taking that Phragmites out. But Phragmites is notoriously spreads, really, and so I guess my question is if there's, and I don't know if this is the case, but if there's still Phragmites on other portions of the site, I don't know how you're going to keep the Phragmites out of there and then maintain, that just concerns me. Maybe Mike knows a way of doing that, I don't know. But, and is there, because I think there's Phragmites kind of surrounding the entire area. But I would just be curious to know, because I think that's also a concern, because it's not just that you maintain the health of the wetland, but also that you keep the invasives out. And I think that in my mind was one of the biggest concerns, just knowing how invasive Phragmites can be.
I don't have an answer for that. You know, I'm not a specialist in that. So, but I know Phragmites are very, very invasive. There's no doubt about it.
Has there been other situations where you've had to go in a couple of years later and fix up?
I mean,
What I'm wondering is this an expense that a homeowner individually could even accept, right? I mean, is this $5,000 or $10,000 to go in and mitigate it 4 years later, or is this potentially a $100,000 project?
I
It
don't know. I
depends
mean,
on-
we could get some estimates of what it costs to create it, and then if you had to go in and work in that little pocket and I don't know, replant or whatever you have to do, I mean, we could come up with some estimates.
I'm
And
just
at
trying to
that
get a
point-
sense whether a homeowner could even imagine taking on this responsibility.
I mean,
And it would be multiple homeowners having to take it on as well, so.
Well, it would just be the individual lots that it applies to, right?
The lucky
Still.
individual, yeah.
Yeah, I
It's not
think,
all the lots, but still,
is it 2 lots or
we're
1
talk-
lot that has the mitigation? It's all in one lot?
Just one lot.
it's the corner, yeah.
The corner one?
So even though there's wetlands in the other parcels, the actual permit to do the expansion of the wetland is all on that one kind of larger lot down in the corner?
But if we go with the 3-lot or the 4-lot subdivision instead of the 6-lot, then that's not necessary, correct?
I think the 4 lot
Well,
was
if
still
you do the
necessary.
3-lot, then there's no
Right, there's
impact to
no
any of the
impact.
lots.
Right. And the 4-lot, the impact
You
is
could leave it
minimal.
2 lots the way it is now,
I
and
think the 4 lot, it still required the mitigation.
But it was much smaller, right? The 4-lot?
no.
No, it was the same mitigation
Just-
on the
it's-
same lot with the same.
It's a little smaller, but not much.
Okay. So the 3-lot basically says we could do 3-lot and not have any issues, and not have to worry about the future homeowner expense.
Right.
I mean, this doesn't sound like the kind of work that like the average landscaper would do, right? I mean, and not do it correctly.
Well, I guess, we're not talking about the landscaper that goes out and cuts lawns for a living. It's someone that understands plants and wetland plants, so,
Yeah, I think it'd be
it
heavy
would have to be
equipment
someone who
involved
has that
Creating
experience.
Yeah, that's where I'm going.
But that's in the
And
creation.
But
Well,
even
but
to
it might have to be
understand that you have to pay
recreated.
for
That's
the
the
annual
risk, right?
report that has
It
to be
says-
submitted to Army Corps, because a personal residence taking on the burden of having to submit a report like that means they have to engage a professional anyway to go out and assess the quality of the wetland. So I think I want to leave this in, I recognize you offered to do some research and costing and stuff like that. I think, let's just have Michelle, and maybe you can, Michelle, circulate by email an update to the board and Ernie, to you, just what are these actual, the actual reports that are being filed with Army Corps with regard to these other subdivisions right now. Let's just understand what that is. And again, Tom, I tend to agree with you that this is, even if these have wetland mitigation, this is still an apples to oranges comparison. I don't mean to keep using that same phrase, but I just feel like a single homeowner, the burden of this is pretty onerous. And I don't know what happens to that homeowner if they fail to comply with the permit. I don't know what the consequence of that is, but maybe, Michelle, if you can help us understand that as well.
One
I
other
think it
quick,
depends, but I think I can call Army Corps and find out what's typical.
Okay.
one other quick question.
And I'm sorry, go ahead,
Okay.
Steve.
No, I was going to say, so we're concerned that the individual homeowner may not be able to take on this burden. Is there some mechanism where we could consider approving a 6-lot subdivision, but force the developer to retain ownership of this one lot through the 5-year period? Because they have hopefully the resources and the responsibility? Does that, because that's,
I don't
might
know
get
that
us
that
over
means
some-
that the developer will still have the means to be able to carry it through. The
Right.
point is, you're asking a single homeowner to take on a responsibility that's a little bit different when you have a large subdivision with a large developer and a homeowners association.
I think
can
a
take
I'm just trying
bond
to
would
think of
still,
alternatives.
I guess a bond would still be very appropriate in that
Oh, yeah.
situation. And again,
Potentially.
obviously, we can't formally request it, but I would love to see a copy of like what one of these things looks like, an annual report on the maintenance of it.
Michelle may be able to
Bond
pull
should
one, not
probably
necessarily that
cover
Mike
the
is doing, but you may
reporting
be able to
and
get
the
one from the Army
maintenance.
Corps website, because I think they give typical example response letters and things like that we could pull.
I think I've seen them on some other projects. There, a few letters, a few page letters and some photos, and then just a general description on what they found and if there's any recommended repairs or replantings. But I think the bond should probably cover the costs for the reporting itself and any maintenance during those 5 years.
Because, I mean, at the risk of sounding, I'm struggling with what's the metric for a successful swamp? It's just like, how do you know if it's working?
Well,
you know?
but there is measurement. There actually is a way that
Well,
they will.
that's what I'm sure there are, but
So, yeah, it's like
But
a
that's
certain
why,
percentage
that's why
of
it's not,
thriving
that's why it's not a
plants.
typical homeowner that would take that on. It's somebody that, has the developer or the,
I guess one of the other drawbacks to the larger lot layout is that they are riding close to the 5 acre of disturbance, and Ernie made some adjustments between the last layout and this one to shift a driveway, and that decreased the overall disturbance, but they're still very close to the 5 acre limit, and we were talking about a way of trying to really contain that number or possibly to check the number ourselves just to verify that they are less than 5, because if they go over the 5 acres, then it becomes a different category of a SWIP that they would require. So I don't know if Ernie wants to talk.
and if that happened, what would that mean to the layout or to any additional impacts to the wetlands? Do you have a sense of that, Joe?
Well, going over 5 acres, then they're required to incorporate some means of water quality and quantity. And if creating a wetland takes care of some of that, that's something we'd have to look at for, if the wetland could serve another function in stormwater quantity and quality.
Okay.
Another thing and I talked to Joe briefly about this, what we're considering maybe in addition, right now we're under, so technically, by the law, we're under, okay?
And where are you at right now?
We're about 4.9 acres.
4.9?
But there's probably some things that we could do where we could put down some temporary mats to even reduce that disturbance a little more. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to go to half of that, but maybe it goes down to 4.8 or something like that. But, you know, the law says 5 acres, we're under 5 acres. And
Well,
We
I
can-
agree
and
that
we
on a
can-
written plan, you may be under 5 acres. I think our concern is that in practice and out in the field, we know that construction typically doesn't always exactly match what's, you know, what limits of disturbance are there. So I
Laurie,
don't,
we do layout for buildings within hundreds of a foot. So I'm sure we can lay out a wetland and
oh,
be within.
I don't doubt that your buildings will be there. I'm talking about construction
I'm not talking
vehicles
about the
driving over.
buildings, I'm talking about the other stuff. We can lay out those limits and be very specific about it. I'm not worried about that.
It's 4.94 acres, I believe, is the number, so.
That's on the updated plan? Okay.
So we don't have a lot of margin for error here,
Right.
But it is under 5.
but it is under
It's under
5.
5 acres.
And have you validated that, Joe? I know we
Well, that's
were
what
holding
we
off
were-
because we
we were
hadn't settled on a lot
checking
layout yet, so I
out.
didn't want to.
You know, if Ernie was willing to provide the CAD drawing to us so we could check it, but it's, I mean, it is going in under his stamp and seal, so there is some validity to taking that at face value, but I know that, you know, the town did request me to ask him that, so.
Okay.
I mean, you know, there's way, but you know, Joe, there's ways of controlling that if the town so chooses to do that. It can be staked, then we can do an as-built, and you can check it. I mean, if there's a concern that we're going to be over 5 acres, there's ways of doing that. I mean, you know that as well as I do.
Are there any more questions or comments from board members before we open for public comment?
I'm just wondering whether we should really take another look at the 3 acre, or the 3 lot or the 4 lot option.
Oh, I think, I mean, I'm leaning towards not having any wetland impact, which would be the three lot layout.
The 3
And
lot, yeah.
I've said before, I'll
I
say
know.
it again for the record, representing my client, that's not on the table. The only reason I resisted doing layouts, because even though we call them alternatives, they're not alternatives for discussion. We're looking at 6 lots.
So it's all or nothing?
Yes,
That's his position?
yes.
Okay.
He's got a permit, he's within the law, and we want to proceed on that basis.
Any other questions or comments from board members before we open for public comment? All right. Is there anyone here who would like to speak on the Stuart Scott application? Falling once? Okay. Okay. Ernie, you can come on back up. It doesn't look like we have any speakers this evening. I guess I'm looking for opinion from the board, because we have a couple ways we can go here. We can continue with the direction that Michelle will go and look at these projects, see whether there's actual wetland mitigation. To Tom's point, it's kind of an apples to orange comparison, because you're putting a burden on a single-family homeowner versus, you know, a large subdivision with a homeowners association and a developer still involved. Or we can close the public hearing and we can choose a lot layout.
Well, can we choose a lot layout, or
Say.
is
I
it
don't think so.
a 6 lot?
Well,
or not?
We have-
let's just talk process, okay. First of all, with the adjourned public hearing, it'll give time for the planner to put the response to the new information just received today into the record. Now, remember, the board serves as the lead agency. We've circulated this project. So then, based on the facts in the record, you have to make a determination under SEQA as to how you feel the various impacts you've identified have been mitigated. And, you know, aside from the Army Corps issue, there were some other issues that the board had with respect to the pads, the fill, the distances, things like that. So all those concerns, then we could go through the record, we could give you a summary of all the information that's in the record, and then you can have a discussion as to how you see you want to proceed.
So
So I just point out, Ernie, that And all or nothing means that if they decide that this 6-lot subdivision has unmitigated impacts, they may not be able to grant approval.
Understand.
Okay, so,
Did Robert did you and Robert talk?
we had a telephone tag last week, but I haven't heard from him since, yeah.
So who's Robert?
That's the attorney for the applicant.
Oh, thank you.
And I think tag, he's at just in the legal sense.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a great idea, Tom, because honestly, one of the things I was thinking about coming here tonight is the whole fill issue and where that all wound up. So I don't remember how that got closed.
Well, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that yes, there was fill brought in there, as you know, for pad sites. And they were, I think the applicant is allowed to bring so much in over a certain period of time, and I think we kind of determined, although it's not documented exactly, but I think it was determined that it was done over a certain amount of time, and there's so much fill there, and they felt that it was done within what's allowed by the town. Is that correct, Joe?
Yeah, I think, if I remember, your office kind of defined some of the volume, the total amount of fill, and then we looked at how many years that had potentially gone on for, and also how many lots there are in the subdivision, and when you divide it out by the allotment of,
However, it was only 2 lots
375.
during all those years.
yeah, that's true.
And I think
Yeah,
the
it wouldn't
limit is-
be
divided
based
by
on a
the cubic
proposed
yard.
number
I
of
think the
lots. It would
limit
be
is
based on the existing number
375
of lots.
cubic yards a year, or 375
Yeah,
yards a
I
year.
I
might have
think
to
you're
look
bumping
back
into
at the
the thing that I've
numbers.
struggled
Yeah.
with is, I wasn't aware that if you got a larger thing, and I don't mean to throw this at you, Ernie, but you got this approval to do this, there's a wetland on the property, it doesn't, is it like some kind of unstated rule, you get to gradually fill the wetland?
No.
I think the
that it
problem
can't.
is that there was, because of the historic fill in the area, there were certainly wetland locations that were pretty close to where the fill was placed. So it was unclear, because unless you dig out all the fill and go and look at historic aerials, whether or not some of the filling happened in wetlands. Now, I will also say that this predated the wetland law in the town. So, but assumably, they still would have been under the Army Corps jurisdiction.
Did it also
Okay.
predate the
But
town's
nobody
fill?
can actually determine that at this point, because there wasn't a delineation and then a subsequent, at that time, before the fill was placed in, there was no delineation. Everyone was looking at, then going back and looking at the fill that was
Is
placed
the
in.
fill part of the wetland law, or was that separate and
No,
it did
Phil's
it?
No,
in the
Phil's
zoning
separate.
ordinance.
That's a separate special permit for,
That law's been around longer, though, than the wetland law, so it probably was.
That's what I'm saying, like,
Yeah.
It was probably in existence when this original subdivision occurred, which begs the question as to why it was not subdivided then, and it was only 2 lots then.
Yeah.
Agreed.
That was the opening sentence.
So I think it sounds like we want to adjourn one more time. Ernie, I'm conscious that in your letter you asked for us to try to move this along. Are you in agreement that we have a few more things we're going to clear up and make one more adjournment here?
Okay, one more adjournment.
All right. Michelle, I don't know how much time we need to be able to,
I'll
Do the
pull the
research.
information from the 2 files, and then I will also get a report. And I think I can even actually get you an active report for some monitoring done, so you can see what it actually looks like.
even if it's appropriate to redact it, I mean, it's, just give us a feel for what they look like and the type of expertise that might be needed to do something like that.
Okay.
Okay. So we have June 21 and we have July 5.
Oh, I can make for June 21, it's fine.
You can do June 21?
Yeah.
Okay. Ernie, it looks like Fakori is on June 21st. Is it acceptable? We'll move it to the same, it's our next meeting, so it's as close as we can make it. Tom, is there anything else that might take more than 2 weeks to address, or are we comfortable that 2 weeks is fine?
I don't know. Until we look at this information, I have no idea.
Okay.
2 weeks goes by fast.
No, I know, and you said you're speaking with the attorney or trading, so I don't know if there was anything else coming out of those discussions that we needed to,
I don't know.
okay. So we can move you to June 21, and potentially, depending what comes out of the conversations to be had, there may need to be some additional time, otherwise, we'll try to wrap it up on the 21st. All right, do I have a motion to adjourn the Stuart Scott 6-lot subdivision public hearing to June 21st?
So moved.
Second.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is a discussion for Summit Woods, 122 lots on Route 52.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Andy Gilchrist, attorney with Tazinski, Cavalier, and Gilchrist. We've been retained by the property owner and applicant to bring the project back to the board and complete the subdivision review. And first, we appreciate being placed on your agenda. I think we're putting that up on the board so that everyone
Great.
could see. There we go.
Thank you. Yeah, and we have a few members of the board that probably have never seen this before, so, and others of us that recall it from way back when, I'll say. So if you
So
don't mind
maybe-
doing, kind of start from the beginning, give us the basic overview.
I
of
think so.
the
Let me
application,
give
that would be great.
the
Can I
basic
just ask-
overview. Sure.
When was the last time this was here? 2009. Okay,
2009.
thank you.
So welcome back.
Thank you.
The brief overview, the project site is a total of 325 acres. There actually is a total of 175 lots. Cluster subdivision, cluster approved by the town board off Route 52. As I said, it's a cluster subdivision. Is it okay if I go over to the board, or do I need to be
Sure.
near the mic?
You're fine, there's a,
There's a mic
Microphone
over
over there.
There we go. Is that okay?
You can pretend you're a bad lounge act.
Okay. I've done that at other ones. So, internal road system here, coming down to a cul-de-sac, loop road here, again to a cul-de-sac. Now, I think it's
just
good.
orient us on 52, give us a sense of where 216 comes in, I think
I'm
it's
going
up
to
a ways.
defer to
Yeah.
Mr. Day for
Okay.
that.
All right, you got 216 over here, this is Primrose.
Okay.
Okay, to give you perspective.
And I'll give you kind of another perspective too, which is right here on the plat is the Montage subdivision that's currently in front of the board as well. And you'll note an area right here, if you can recall the Montage project, there is a road that's going to be leading from Montage, is proposed to loop into the road system for this project, which will provide an additional access road out to the public highway.
Okay.
As I said, the project site is 325 acres, internal road system. The area you see that are in the crosshatch are wetland areas, okay? You'll note that there are very little wetland impacts on the project. In point of fact, there's only 2 areas where the wetlands would be impacted. One is right here for a road, so there's a road crossing across this neck of wetland. Down in this location, there's going to be a private on-site wastewater treatment plant that will service both this project and the Montage project. I think as the board is aware, last time the Montage project was in front of you, there is an agreement between this project owner and the Montage owners to coordinate on a combined wastewater treatment plan, so the projected waste flows from both projects will be treated with the on-site wastewater treatment plant, which will be located down in this area of the project. As I
Are you receiving any services from Montage? It sounds like they would receive services from you with the wastewater treatment plant. Are you?
Well,
What do you get?
there actually is,
Okay.
which is, there's also an on-site
Well,
water supply In this area of the project, there will be a tank for water supply that'll service both projects. And Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the water supply predominantly is coming from the Montage.
Yeah, there's 2 wells on Montage that will serve both these sites. There's also future well sites on Montage. Montage initially will construct a 200,000 gallon storage tank on its property, and as Summit Woods is developed, we will then pump to the storage tank that is up here.
Right here.
That will serve both this site and Montage. We'll put an altitude valve on both tanks to control flow, and this will have fire flow. So.
Is that the entrance road where the tank is next to it?
No, this is, there's an entrance road here.
No,
but-
where's 52? That's what I'm...
Right here.
Oh, it is, okay.
Yep.
I lost my sense of direction for it.
We're upside down.
There was a question.
Yes, thank you. Should either one of these parties decide that they did not wish to go forward, does the other have the right to go ahead and develop that independently, exclusive of the other?
I think when Montage was here, I think they were adamant to mention.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to have
Oh,
you come closer
sorry.
to the mic for us.
When Montage was in front of the board last time, I think they had expressed and had given you documentation that the applicant for this project, they have an agreement that if Montage goes first, they have rights to build and access this property.
Even without your participation, should it require that?
In a sense of,
In other words, should you decide that all of a sudden you didn't want to do this anymore?
well, then each project stands on its own. Each project has its own capacity to provide its own, there's 3 wells on this site. There's also a spot for wastewater. If the other project decided to do it just wanted to be independent, then it, as you guys know, we had submitted a plan showing a treatment plant on the other end of that project, and also it has its own water supply.
Okay.
So they're independent, they were designed independently, but however, we are in front of the DEC right now with a regional design for both water and sewer.
I realize this is a very hypothetical scenario I'm talking, but in that instance, then, the original water treatment plant for Montage would be back on the table. Because if you recall, that was off the table and it said, no, the treatment plant is over at Summit Woods.
You have to look at Montage. We did a phase 1, phase 2. Phase 1 being Montage on its own. Phase 2 would then service Summit Woods and Montage.
Right.
Montage can stand on its own for both water and or sewer. We're not choosing to do sewer on our own.
Okay.
We're choosing to go this route. I hope I cleared that up.
I have a quick question. You're saying that Summit Woods now is going to be using these wells that are in Montage.
Correct.
But in the EIS for Summit Woods, that was never analyzed.
EIS is Summit Woods. Yeah,
Because
but at the time.
Montage didn't exist at
But
the
when we
time.
wrote that EIS, we were not asking to regional, the board had not asked, not this board as well as the DEC, had not asked us to regionalize the
Oh,
systems.
I understand that, but that's just a missing piece of the record, though. The impacts related to sharing this infrastructure is not in this EIS.
But wouldn't that have been addressed under Montage?
Right.
It was not
Not
addressed.
to cut you off. Admittedly, it wouldn't be in the EIS because that wasn't on the plans at the time. There has been engineering work done for the combined water and sewer plans. So it's not that the information's not there. It's agreed, it's not in the EIS, but there is engineering data for that.
But has it been submitted to the board? Because we haven't
It is,
seen,
again, admittedly, it's
or
not
to the lead
submitted into
agency,
the
I should
town.
say.
And I know Mr. Dennis will have to review that. It has been submitted to DEC in connection with the Speedies permit. So it just has not been reviewed by the town. That does
Okay,
need to be
and because that has to be part of the secret record, and it has to be reviewed by the lead agency to make sure that there's no impacts related to that.
We don't disagree with that at all. You're doing your duty as lead agency when you do that. You clearly can take into account the review that's undertaken by the department and their comments, and there is a record on that, and that needs to be submitted to you for technical review. No question, because you're serving
I
the lead
think part of
agency.
the confusion both with Montage and this development is, first of all, the length of time they're away in hiatus, and we won't go into that.
Correct.
But, and I think that there are common elements that need to be kind of blended together. I mean, the sewer and the water. We also have Montage saying that they're relying upon the road system for exiting.
Correct.
But that if this doesn't get developed, there'll still be an exit road. And so I think that's created a lot of unnecessary consternation by not kind of tying it together a little bit better. So I think the professional staff will end up recommending to the board that maybe we should kind of meet with both applicants' professionals to see how we can't, to the extent possible. We're not saying you're linked together, but I think if we have at least an agreement as to how those common elements are going to be reviewed for both, you know, as it pertains to both, I think both projects would be in a much better place.
And again, I don't disagree with you, and I think that kind of offline meeting with technical staff and technical consultants for both applicants will go a long way to moving the review of both projects.
Right.
Now, having said that, as Mr. Day said, in some part, they're going through a review independently because they can be viewed as standalone projects. But it does make sense, and certainly DEC has said it, and I guess the health department, county health department has concurred that for water and sewer, it makes sense to have a more regionalized approach. So while they're separate projects.
Well, and when we were discussing it with Montage a few months ago, and they were going to come right back, and they haven't, but that's another story. The planner, I think, at that meeting raised the fact that really by joining the plans together, there may be other things that have to be reviewed that haven't been, which may be reviewed elsewhere, but it's floating around outside this building and this board. So.
And I think your suggestion of the meeting with town technical staff and the technical staff for these projects is a very good idea. It's going to get everyone hopefully on the same page and move this review forward. It makes sense for the board, then you can advise the board.
Well, I think
on
that
these
it helps
projects.
us. We've been struggling with the record because the other project has a very long history. It was started out seeking a rezoning, it didn't happen, et cetera. This project got to a point, then you went off. My last recollection was there's a lot of work on the bog turtles with Fish and Wildlife.
Yes, there was.
And I remember a different attorney here one night expressing frustration with that. So, I mean, you got all these things that have gone on. I think we're unaware of it. The board's unaware of it. The record's certainly probably missing much of it.
Well,
I'd like to add something else, and that's that with this project in particular, and possibly a little bit with Montage, I think there's information that's outdated now. So we don't want to go at that piecemeal and try to, I'd rather understand, say, pull the table of contents from the EIS and just run through it and say, what's the age of the information that's been provided? Is it sufficient? Does it need to be updated? And then are there, in looking at these two projects together, which we have not done to this point, are there additional things we would need to add to that table of contents of an EIS document to ensure that the board has a full understanding of how these two projects either stand alone or work together? And I don't think we're quite there yet. I think it's where you're headed. It sounds like that's where you're headed. But for me, if you're meeting with our professionals, that's what I would hope would come out of that. So the board has an understanding of what additional information we would be expecting, what's being updated, what's not being updated, et cetera.
I would concur. I do think that's appropriate. There has been a several-year hiatus from the project. When you have one project at the stage this was at, which was the FEIS was completed and we're on the cusp of findings, and then the issue of the bog turtle and the bat comes up, and then there's a lot that has occurred on the technical side on that issue. You know, I'll just
There's a lot
add.
that's occurred in the town, even just with traffic on Route 52, so.
That's not to disregard that. What I'm saying from the applicant side, there was a lot of work to deal with those issues. I've done my best, at least summarily, to go through what's happened in the intervening years. There is a habitat management plan that's been prepared. There will be a conservation easement. There will be a need for some type of land conservancy to make sure that this area is appropriately maintained going forward. Unlike the last project that was here, there's a sufficient number of lots so that there is a proposed homeowners association here that will deal with those issues going forward. There's been a lot of technical work. You're correct. When that kind of gap happens in a review, you're right. The ambient, the existing environment, has there been anything that's changed? And I agree with you. When technical staff sits down, you go through that content and see what, if anything, needs to be updated. Obviously, one that always pops up on these types of projects is traffic. Has the traffic changed along here? Do we need to look at that again? But is there anything else? And there may be. And there may be.
And
So
just for my clarification, because I wasn't around when the project came through the first time. My understanding is you got through the FEIS, and you're going into findings, and then there was, my understanding from reading what I read was that there was an understanding that the information about the threatened and endangered species that were potentially on the site was never included in the seeker record because it wasn't known at the time that these potentially existed there. So all of that information also then has to be brought into the seeker record as part, because that's not in the current EIS. That's my understanding, that all of this stuff about the, from what I read from the history of the project.
Sure.
And so I'm guessing that now you have information, updated habitat studies, and all these things that were never originally included in the EIS because there wasn't the knowledge that existed on the site at the time. And they have to be brought into the seeker record as well.
the issue came up clearly as to the bog turtle in the Indiana bat after the FEIS, absolutely. And that's what sidetracked the adoption of findings.
Okay.
And there are certainly a number of technical studies that have gone between the applicant's consultant, Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps. Yeah, those do need to be incorporated. Probably the right vehicle for that is a supplement to the final EIS. But I think your suggestion is a good one, which when technical staff sits down to go through the issues that were identified in the scoping process for the EIS, do any need to be updated, have any conditions changed? And that's appropriate.
I mean,
We do
just
need
another
current
example,
data.
I don't know if we've looked when the last time the wetland boundaries were delineated. I mean, you've got to be close to 10 years now, probably, since they were last delineated. so.
I know that the Montage site had their jurisdictional determination was close to expiring, and you had that updated. I remember that, and I don't remember this one as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so
There
so it's
was-
thand like that.
Right, and not to cut you off, there was Army Corps of Engineers has issued a determination, and now to get back to the wetland issues, there's the one road crossing here, and down in the area of the wastewater treatment plant, there will be some directional drilling, boring, under the wetland area to get to the wastewater treatment plant. The Corps determined that both of those activities are covered by a nationwide permit, that an individual wetland permit's not required. That determination and that coverage is currently being updated. So you're correct. There are wetlands on the site, but those have been very timely and most recently reviewed by the Corps as well. And we're asking that that coverage for the nationwide permit be reauthorized.
A nationwide permit, I've never heard of that.
When you have federal wetlands, it falls under the jurisdiction of the Army Corps. Before you can do any work in there, you need a permit. What the Corps does is for certain activities that they've already analyzed and deemed, if I can use this term, not to be a significant impact, they publish a whole list of what are called nationwide permits. They're very general permits. If you fall within the ambit of a nationwide permit, all you need to do is put the Corps on notice, and you are covered under the general permit. There is a general permit for residential subdivisions where the wetland impacts are so insignificant that you're covered by the nationwide permit. And you simply put the Army Corps on notice, indicate that you will comply with the terms of the general permit. This one, in case, you write that down, is nationwide permit 29. If you were to go on the Army Corps' website and just put in nationwide permits, that'll come up and explain the nationwide permit system. You can go to 29 and see what's included in that. But the Corps did determine that the project's covered by nationwide permit 29. We can get that information to you. So.
And that determination was made recently, or that determination was made some time ago?
In 2013 is my recollection, and we've asked that that be reauthorized, and that's pending with the Corps.
So it sounds like you've been working on this fairly consistently. I'm hearing different years since 2009 thrown out as you're doing and working on different things. So do we have some sort of progression of maps or something that just lets us see how this has evolved?
That's a fair point. The last time this was in front of the board, we said was 2009. This is predominantly the layout as it was in 2009. There hasn't been any change, except for one small item. Another agency that had some oversight on this project and has been working in the intervening years is the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. What they found was one area on the site that should not be disturbed, and that was right down here. On the original layout, there was a lot here. This was lot 30. That area now is not subject to disturbance. There's a preservation.
Archaeological or something else?
That's correct.
Okay.
All right. So what was done is that this lot has been relocated to the end of the cul-de-sac here. You'll note on the plan, this was done in 2012. This lot is lot 30. Used to be located here. It's just been relocated here. Aside from that one minor change, it's the same layout that was reviewed in the EIS.
So that lot would then be part of the conservation easement, or what would protect that lot?
This lot is subject to an agreement with SHPO, with Office of Parks, Recreation, Historic Preservation, on limits to disturbance, and that's a separate restriction.
Okay.
It wouldn't be subject to the conservation easement, but it's a separate restriction through SHPO. So that's the layout, and again, we have negotiated with, well, the project applicant has negotiated with Army Corps and U.S. Fish and Wildlife on conservation easement and a habitat management plan. They will require ultimately that this area, and again, the area that's open and to remain open and preserved is about 201 acres, would be subject to those conservation restrictions. The vehicle for that is the conservation easement and habitat management plan. And there will be a requirement that a group, generally a land conservancy group, take on the responsibility to ensure that that is, the restrictions are being adhered to, they're being complied with. The property will continue to be owned by the HOA, but there would be an agreement in place with the Land Conservancy to come in and make sure that the restrictions placed through the conservation easement are being complied with.
And Mark, I apologize, I don't recall, was Montage also going to be subject to an HOA?
Yeah, there's parts of.
Will it be the same HOA, or will there just be an inter-agreement?
No, it'll be a
between them?
separate HOA, but coincidentally, we may be using the same land conservancy because they're adjacent parcels.
Okay,
If you remember, as part of the EIS on this project, we were offering up property for land conservancy, so
okay.
hopefully that will be the same group for both properties.
Okay.
I think your point is well taken. Legally, there has to be separate HOAs for the separate projects, but there should be some kind of agreement between them in terms of retaining a land conservancy to their adjacent projects to
I
make
just
sure
didn't know
they
if there
work.
was a mechanism with the AG or somebody who could combine them at the point, because they're sharing well, they're sharing wastewater treatment, so I
And you're
just,
going to have to deal with the water and sewer.
that's what I'm
issue
saying, yeah,
Between the two.
yeah.
Difficult legally simply
It'll be on the
because-
list, that's all.
It may be on the list, but it's difficult simply because two separate project sponsors, you know, you put the HOA documents. Yeah, two separate homeowners association, but there should be some cooperation between the two, no doubt, and we'll have to deal with that. Just one other point to quickly, the county health department has been involved as well with the wastewater design. That engineering work has been done. A speedies permit for the discharge from the wastewater treatment plant, that application is at Region 3 and being reviewed. This is information that needs to be supplied to the town, to technical staff to review as well.
I'm just going to ask you to pause there for a second. So Michelle, we're hearing a few things right now about other agencies that are involved with this project where we're acting as lead agency. So is there anything we need to do as the town to be involved with this or to understand, make sure? Because
Well,
again, I'm a little bit concerned if we're going down a road of getting permitting before this is completed, it's,
Well, you're the lead agency, so you're,
They
you
can do their
ultimately-
reviews, but they
Right,
can't
they
get their
can't, they
approvals.
can't make any approvals until seeker is complete. And ultimately, seeker is not complete until you say it's complete, until you decide that the project has no significant adverse impacts. And right at this point in time, I don't think we have a full seeker record to be able to do that. We don't have the information in the record about the habitat. We don't have the information about the potential for shared services, and there's a host of other things potentially that
need
may
to
be
be
out of
updated.
date or whatever it is. So that's the concern.
but I'm asking you, I'm trying to get to, and maybe this is just something that when you sit down with the town's professionals, you guys will figure it out and make a recommendation. But I'm saying, does it sound like the town should have been involved in anything, or do we need to review something
review
sooner
was
than
sup-
later if there's a process
We're
already
going to
started?
find out when we give the information. I mean, many
Okay.
times applicants usually keep the lead agency informed. We're experiencing all over a lack of that courtesy, if
Coordinated
you will,
review.
from the other agencies and from the applicants. They go off and they do their thing. I'm not criticizing you specifically.
But the
It's
lead
general.
agency is not necessarily bound to those determinations.
Well, no, but I mean, the thing is that had we known all of this was going on, then the project would have, not been in this total hiatus. From our point of view, it's been in a vacuum. You've been doing things, but we've been totally ignorant of it. There are certain things that maybe you've submitted to these other agencies that this board would have liked to have commented on. And those agencies are at the point now that they may give you an approval, but they may face a comment from the lead agency saying, just like you comment on what we do, we have comments back to you. So this could place some, I'm not saying there are, but, I really think that hamstrings a lead agency in its role.
Well, I can understand that those comments, absolutely. Many times these projects in front of a planning board will list out other permits and approvals that may be required, but they're not pursued for whatever reason. But you go through the seeker process and you have to analyze them. And this one took a different tack, which was all of these permits or approvals having been identified as being needed. Now, I don't know the full record as well, but I got to believe all of these agencies were identified. Lead agency was coordinated. This board was established as lead agency. An EIS was scoped, a DEIS and an FEIS was done on coordination with the other involved agencies. Then there were need for more technical study on the habitat and endangered species issues. And yes, admittedly, then there was dealings directly with the applicant with other involved agencies. What we need to do now to get the project kind of back on track is get that information to technical staff, let you have the time to review that, see if there's any additional information that you need to discharge your duty as lead agency. Absolutely. We need to make sure that record's complete.
I just want to make sure that everybody understands is in agreement that we, in essence, because it's been so long, we're starting from scratch in our review. And I'm not saying the document starts from scratch. I'm just saying our review has to start from scratch and really go back through, understand what's changed, what's going
I'm
on.
not going to disagree with the concept, but I'll disagree with the starting from scratch.
Even just from the point of view that we have new members on the board that have never seen
And we
this
need to
before.
familiarize the board,
Right.
correct. But the project's undergone a lot of review to date, and it needs to be brought back to the board, and a lot of technical work and engineering work done. It's our job to bring that back to the board and update the board and to continue and complete the review, absolutely.
Just one example, I think, is with this combined treatment plant. The original issue that arose with the treatment plants is it's being located near an already developed residential neighborhood on, what's that road?
Calabar.
No,
no.
Calabar Road. Was it Calabar?
Calabar.
Calabar. And when we had public hearings in the past, we had representatives of that community here of their concerns that the treatment facility is going to be located in their backyards, their words. But all the houses that benefit from it are a substantial distance away. I don't know, and this board certainly wouldn't know at this point, what is being done and what DEC is asking to be done.
This plant has been shown on, before we regionalized, that plant was in that same location. So when you review the original document, Summit Woods, even before regionalization was discussed, that plant was always in that same location.
Yeah, but we haven't made any decision on it.
No, I understand,
So-
but you're,
But
But
I'm
this
just
is a
saying
good, this is
from
a
a-
good example, Mark, though, just again, from this board's perspective, we're going to be looking at the project again, right? We're going to look at all aspects of the project.
Okay.
And we
I
may
don't
have
think we're
questions,
denying
and we
that.
may make suggestions, and we may need additional study and other things done to
And now
bring
we've
ourselves up
doubled
to
the capacity of this plant because originally there was the other one up on 52 and now there's,
Correct.
this one was always here for here, but now it's doubled.
Correct.
And that's going to create some consternation with those residents there. And I
It
just,
may raise a
all I
concern.
know is I don't know what DEC has been told. I don't know what DEC knows. how DEC has addressed that, will they? And that's probably a comment, had the board been kept in the loop as to what was going on, that they may have had somebody write to DEC and say, look, the one concern we have is the odor situation that these residents have brought up. And what was and so we may find things like that, a lot of things, because we've been in a vacuum for 8 years.
And guys, we are gonna get new copies of all this stuff, right? Because any piece of paper in my house that's older than 2009 is in the firebox, right? So,
Presumably, there's a record here in Town Hall. If you want every piece of paper, if there was a full EIS done on here?
No, we're not asking for.
You mean
I
these
think
plans?
his plan set.
Oh, absolutely.
to go back
I
and
believe-
narrative and stuff that, it's like,
I think that's going to be part of the technical review.
Yeah.
Sure.
We got to fill the gaps as to what
Right.
documents
I
may be
think,
created.
I think in the letter that I had sent to you, I noted at least 2 versions of the plan that the town had never, ever seen, that revisions that happened during the time period when we last saw the last submittal to now. And at least, and that, those were, I think it was,
There's certainly the one in 2012.
well, there's the plans were revised on August 4th, 2008, and January 24th, 2012, because I do not believe the submission in 2009, when you were in front of the board in 2009, I don't believe there was a submission with that. I think you were in front of the board several times just to, basically, I think you were adjourned, I think is what was going on.
But certainly, we're going to get the
So
board
you
up
see,
to
we
speed.
have a little dilemma, not knowing.
No dilemma. It's our job to bring the board up to speed with the revisions, when they were done and why, and all the technical information, and get that reviewed and get the project back in front of the board. Just procedurally, when I reviewed the record, I think that the public hearing, it has never been closed. I think it's still technically open. Is that correct?
Adjourned without date,
Okay.
what they used to do.
So it means you would re-advertise, but technically it's an
Absolutely.
adjourned public
Yeah,
hearing.
when we're ready for that. We certainly need the technical meeting first to make sure, and let the board decide
I'm
how you
going to
want to.
recommend there's a few things that we're going to need, and we're probably going to want some of the updated information that we're talking about before. We would probably want to bring the public back
I understand
into the
that.
conversation.
And I don't disagree with that approach. It's much easier to
Yeah.
have
I think
as
we all
much
have to be
information.
comfortable knowing what the record is before we have the public coming into it. Yeah,
And it's
And-
important to have current information.
Correct.
for the
Well,
public to
and
read.
And I
Michelle,
would
I
ask
wanna
that we
make
would
sure
be
we're-
included on from this point forward, on any of the information that's going back between the agencies, so that we are up to date from this point forward.
I think that's appropriate. Correct.
And I would also just say, the 2 projects seem a little more, I don't want to say joined at the hip, but a little more cohesive now, relying on each other. And I understand that both could stand on their own, but I think it would be helpful to the board to really understand, you've outlined a few things here, but to really understand if one goes forward and the other doesn't, what's the expectation, and how will that work out? Mark, we've talked about emergency access with Montage. It sounds like now with the wastewater treatment here, but wells on the Montage property. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of interplay. This is going to have a homeowners association. Montage sounds like it'll have a separate homeowners association. So just so the board sort of has an understanding of how the utilities will be delivered to residents in the event that you're joined and sharing. I don't mean joined, but sharing versus standalone, separate. And even, I would say, not necessarily just, and assuming that they're not necessarily built at the same time. So you may even have something where it's a phased type of approach.
Right.
Just help us understand what that looks like, whichever one happens to go first, or if they happen to go at the same time.
Understand the way the systems are designed right now, they are regional. So they will act as regional systems no matter which subdivision goes first. They're going to have capacity to serve each one when it's built. Also, there's going to be agreements between each different development to gain access to
Yeah,
those
I
utilities.
think what we want, though, is something summarizing in writing how the projects interact with each other.
Gotcha, okay.
Just even if it's 3 columns of like, here's what it looks like if it stands alone, this stands alone, and here's what it looks like if they work together, and phasing.
Yep, and it makes a lot of sense. This is an interesting, absolutely. And this is an interesting one where you've got 2 what could be standalone projects, but from certain aspects of the technical review, it does make sense to have one centralized wastewater treatment plant, one water supply that would serve them. They're still separate projects.
It's certainly mitigated to have one and less
There's no
impact,
question,
so
and it
we
works, but
understand.
the difficulty comes up is that they certainly are, and I can understand your request to see how they could be worked as a standalone and how they're working together and what's the coordination between the two and what's the phasing plan and the build-out. That makes sense because they truly do keep their characteristic as standalone projects. They will be standalone, but in essence, the utility and in part the infrastructure, the road, will be coordinated. So the board has to understand that.
And we also have to remember that with the transportation corporations that they both be, that we have to make the town board comfortable
That's correct.
in granting their consent. And I think part of their comfort level is going to be to know the design and the criteria. You know, it's one thing to say the health department's ready to stamp it, but since the town board is the ultimate default owner of the system,
That's correct.
I think they have a lot to say, yeah, so.
Yep. I'll defer to the technical, to the engineers, but the wastewater treatment plant, as I understand it, is state-of-the-art, the kind that can build.
But right now, the town board would look to the town engineer, who would know nothing.
That's correct, but we're going to inform him, so we'll bring him up to date as well.
If I might ask specifically on the traffic impacts, the mitigation of traffic, how do you propose that's going to be handled between the two projects?
Right now, there's a light that's proposed. As you know, there's a shared access easement onto this property over the other to serve one of the entrances on this. So as far as the impacts I'm sorry, for this project or Montage or both?
Well, individually and both, I mean, combined.
Well, but either project has to study the full potential impact of foreseeable development, right?
Which-
So,
And they have to include
Which,
each other.
that is in the document. In the original document, we had done a traffic study for this property.
Okay.
This drive comes out across from Primrose, is that what you said?
Primrose and then the other end of 216.
The other one's 216.
Correct.
But isn't that an emergency? I mean, help me out, Andy. Can you point, like, where, if I was on Montage and I wanted to just go out the other way, where would I?
This
You're
is
gonna
where
come through there.
Montage is kind of located up here.
Right.
That's the road in. If you want to come through this project, if you will,
thank you.
it's going to come across here. This is Montage's land. So they'll be able to construct the road, and it'll come through these two lots and then hook into the road system for this project.
Thank you.
Second part of my question was, I know you're progressing with other agencies. Have you progressed anything with the DOT?
We have early on.
But
Nothing as of yet, no.
so Mark, again, just to reiterate, as you're starting to meet with agencies now for either of these projects, let's just make sure the town
Okay.
professionals are included in those meetings as much as possible.
Okay.
Yeah, one question, actually, Scott asked me to ask about the bridge crossing. Is that more of a contact type bridge and something similar to what Montage?
Very similar
has?
to Montage. There's the one crossing, we're actually proposing to use the same structure.
Okay.
There'll be one crossing
Well, there'll be the one crossing on this project.
and one on Montage?
There's three on the other.
And these are all going to be public roads within it, right?
Proposed, yes. They're be offered for dedication, yeah. So what's the process?
Well, if I can suggest, based on the chair's suggestion, I think what we need to do is set up a meeting offline with the town's technical staff, with the project's technical staff, and keep that moving so that we can have that discussion, see what needs to be done, so that we can then alert the planning board when we get back on another agenda.
Right, and what I would ask, and I know our professionals will do this anyway, but what I would just ask is that once you feel that you've solidified what the plan is as far as any additional study, any addendums, anything that we're going to update, just come back to the board, give us an update, and give us a proposed timeline if you can. We want to see you before 2022.
As well.
Okay,
Before what?
all right.
Before 2022, you are right, we're going to do that. It's very good to meet you all, by the way.
Yeah, no, but, you know, if with these two projects kind of moving at the same time, and Mark, I'm,
At
you know,
lightning speed.
okay?
It's good to see that time has not erased that droll sense of humor.
I wasn't sure how to respond to that, Mark.
My job at this point is to keep the project moving in front of the board. So we'll work diligently to do
Great,
that.
but what I was going to say is, if it's appropriate to have both projects on at the same time, on the same night, we're very comfortable accommodating scheduling to allow that. If there's reason to have them separate for a particular reason, a particular issue with one project versus the other, I think just work with us and help us,
Sure.
you know, at this point, it sounds like you're moving forward, so let's help us make that happen.
Great.
Okay.
So do we contact, do I contact
Sure.
you?
Sure.
And you'll be the point person?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be here
Yeah,
tomorrow.
Michelle can coordinate with you to make that happen, and Pam certainly there as well, so. But we want to make sure that you have all of our professionals and that we understand where you are with each of the agencies you've reached out to, and then again, what additional studies needed, so work with them through that.
Thank you.
Mark, as needed, you know, you're going to bring your Montage applicant as well into that same conversation?
Well, they don't like each other, so I need to,
Yes, clearly they don't play well together.
they
so-
don't play well, but I will try to bring them together.
Ballpark, when will we see you again?
As soon as we get through this.
But it's all about me. I'm really eager to see the updated, narrative on this thing.
I think let's,
What I would suggest is that technical meeting can happen. And let them talk. The first thing that has to happen is reviewing the EIS. What information's in there? Does anything need to be updated? Does anything more need to be done? Your technical staff needs to report to you, and we'd like to come before the board and have that discussion. I hope that happens within a month or 6 weeks. We need to know what has to be done.
Because Montage, when they left here the last time, we're going to update their study with respect to the sewer plant. We don't need two competing reviews of
correct.
the same thing, so it bodes well for the developers to
I can't disagree with
coordinate
that.
some of those
Yep.
things because, and we, God forbid, we get different information from both reviews, which,
Luckily, they have the same engineer.
Well, you can't have too many good reads on a
Well,
sewer
and that's part of
plant,
where
let's face it.
and again, however that needs to work out, giving us kind of that overview, each stands alone and how they work together would be helpful, and again, include the phasing with that, if you would.
Okay.
Okay. Is there anything else that you wanted to ask of us tonight? Okay.
Questions for us before the technical staff meet?
Any other questions from board members? Thank you for the overview.
Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, I don't have anything else for the agenda this evening, so do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second?
Second, all in favor? Aye. Aye, excellent, thank you. Have a good night, folks.